The year is 65 AD. Anthony is 27 years old. He sits in his cockroach-infested apartment, looking out the window on the city of Rome. A cool breeze blows through. He grabs an overripe piece of fruit, and he cuts off the part that's rotten, and he takes a bite of the good part. He has a piece of bread and some sour wine to go with it. This is his supper. Again, he's tried to be grateful, but he is so tired. Anthony had a pretty good life growing up. He grew up in a Jewish family. They attended synagogue every week and had great food, good fellowship, and warm family time. It's meal times like these that he can still smell the spices of the hot meals. He used to have a good job as a tailor's apprentice in the Jewish part of the city. Life wasn't perfect, but Anthony had a lot to be thankful for. And then that preacher came, claiming Jesus was the chosen one, like a tornado ripping through his Jewish community. It was just 10 years ago. Anthony was 17 years old at that time. And he believed. He couldn't help it. This Jesus man's life seemed to fit the prophecies, and he couldn't believe that all these witnesses were lying, especially this preacher man. He seemed so genuine, and he'd lost everything. Why would he lie? Anthony couldn't help it. He believed. He believed. Anthony had become a Christian. And then his life exploded, and everything went downhill fast. His grandpa kicked him out of the neighborhood synagogue and forbid anyone in the family to talk to him. As he takes another bite out of his half-moldy piece of fruit, a tear wells up in his eye as he remembers his grandpa's screaming words, "You are dead to me, Anthony. You are dead to me." He lost his apprentice job with the tailor instantly when the tailor heard he'd become a Christian. Some of the others had become Christians too, and for them it had been far worse. They even got some of their property and land taken away from them. Well, Anthony was instantly poor and lonely and hurting, friendless and familyless. He got a lowly job as a shop assistant for a Roman. So every day now, he sorts rotting fruit, he sweeps the floors, he swats the flies, and he takes orders from obnoxious Roman slaves shopping for their rich owners. The Christians formed a house church in the city, and he's really enjoyed meeting with them the past 10 years. But it doesn't erase all the pain. Last week, for the first time ever, Anthony skipped the Sunday service. Just because. It's Saturday night again now. He sits in his cheap apartment, eating his moldy fruit, and he's tired. He remembers the cakes they had every week in the Jewish synagogues. He remembers his mom's cooking. He remembers her voice when it was sweet towards him, before Jesus came into his life. It's Saturday night. His heart is hurting. He's tired. And Anthony is starting to think about turning back. Turning back to his life before Jesus. Turning back to his life without Jesus. After all, didn't God say in the Old Testament that he'd put everything under the chosen one's feet? Well, it's been 10 years, and Christianity definitely is still at the bottom of most people's feet. Maybe his grandpa and his family and his boss and his coworkers are right. Maybe it's all lies. It's Saturday night. Tomorrow is Sunday service with his house church. A brand new urgent letter just arrived, and it's going to be read at the church tomorrow morning. But Anthony doesn't know that. He's sitting in his apartment, and he's thinking about skipping church again. This time, skipping for good. When Anthony first became a Christian, he grabbed onto Jesus with 2 hands. But right now, he's let go with one of his hands. And that hand is slowly starting to reach back towards his old life. The year is 65 AD, and Anthony is wavering. But there is a brand new letter, written in fire, waiting in a box, and the box is shaking and rumbling. The Christians in his home church will be reading it tomorrow, and it will change everything for Anthony, just in the nick of time. If, that is, he gets there to hear it. It is a letter called Hebrews. Fast forward 80 generations. The year is 2020. Sarah is 19 years old. Her family raised her going to church every week and hearing the Bible stories. But she's 19 now. She's attending college in Indiana, and her parents seem a million miles away. Her professors all seem to think that the Christian faith is full of superstitions and legends. Her science professors tell her that we evolved completely by chance over millions of years. There never was a Garden of Eden or a tree or an Adam or an Eve. Her sociology teacher tells her that some people are born to marry people of the same gender, and it's okay. She says the Bible is homophobic and full of oppression and hatred. When her roommate heard that she was a Christian, she laughed and asked if she'd become one of those 40-year-old virgins. It seems everywhere she looks, all Jesus has given her is pain. Maybe her parents and her family were wrong. Maybe the whole Jesus story was made up. Maybe it's time to give it up. She can still pretend for her parents when she visits at home. But in her heart, maybe it's time to let this Jesus thing go. The year is 2020. Sarah is 19 years old, and she's wavering. But there is a letter she desperately needs, an ancient letter written in fire, waiting in a box, and the box is shaking and rumbling. It is a letter called Hebrews.
Oh, all right. Not done yet. If you got your notes, you can break those out. And remember, anything you guys hear, you want to be writing down for later. Josh, I'm waiting on a signal from you. Okay, all right. So 60% of Americans, this might shock you, 60% of the people in this country still claim that Jesus is their Lord, claim to be Christians. But less than half of them have a church family that they're committed to, which Jesus talked about being an important thing, right? But there's an ancient letter that could change all that if they would ever open it up and read it. It's an ancient letter written in fire, waiting in a box, and the box is shaking and rumbling. It's a letter called Hebrews. A couple months ago, a tornado passed through Rockford. I don't know if any of you guys had any damage on your property. Raise your hand if you did. I know down by Rock Valley that was all tore up. Kendra did, yeah. Anybody else have damage, trees taken down? We had some branches, but didn't really damage us too much. But the next day after the tornado, I was driving to work coming down 31st Street, and I saw something just like this. Trees ripped out of the ground. The one I saw was on the sidewalk, just ripped out. The crazy thing about it was this. Right next to some of these big trees, there were little tiny ones that were just fine. But some of these big, strong ones were ripped out. Yeah. There's another picture, stuff like that. That's kind of what I saw on 31st Street. Yeah. Big, giant ones. Look how strong that one is. It had no problems. It wasn't diseased or anything. You know, it's kind of like this in the Christian life. Every Christian is kind of like a tree. So look around in the room at the different trees that are here. Some of you guys, maybe you're smaller trees, or you might think, oh, that person's a smaller tree, and that person's maybe they're loud, or they seem strong in their faith, or something about them, or seem strong, they're a big tree. And you could probably well, I'm a small tree, this person's a small tree, this is a big one, whatnot. But when the storms come, it really shows what we are. And if you took everybody in Rockford that claims to be a Christian, and you brought them here in this room, and you lined them up in a row like this, and you said, wow, that's a strong one, that's a weak one, that's a strong one, I guarantee you when the storms come in their life, some of them are going to fall away from Jesus. So my question for you is, which one will you be? Will you be one of the trees that makes it through the tornado? Or will you be one of the weak ones? And if you think you'll be one of the strong ones, God actually says to you, watch out. What era are we living in? The New Testament era or the Old Testament era? Yeah, we're in the New Testament era. Ever since Jesus came, this is the final age, the New Testament era. But back in the Old Testament era, a lot of things happened to God's people, right? Remember, they were slaves in Egypt, and some guy named Moses rescued them. Raise your hand if you remember that story. It rings a bell. A guy named Moses. Okay. Then he took the people, and where did they have to walk for a couple years? They had to walk through the desert. And you know what? They were really excited about following God when he was rescuing them and saving them. But then they got out in that desert. And, first of all, I want to say this. They all had been spiritually baptized. All of them had good spiritual food they were getting fed from Moses. And all of them actually had God in person, actually leading them some days. There was a season where God himself was literally leading them by a pillar. And still, listen to what God says. In spite of everything they had going on for them, this is 1 Corinthians 10. In spite of everything they had going for them, God was not pleased with most of them, and their dead bodies ended up scattered across the desert. It's true. Listen to what the next verse says. Now, those things happened to them. It's like, well, that was a long time ago. Why did God even preserve those stories for us if that was the old era? Don't we just need the New Testament? Those things happened to them so that they could be, what? Examples for us, to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things like they did. Nothing ever really changes trying to follow God. Every generation, if you're the people that are trying to follow God, there is a person called Satan, and he's got a whole lot of minions working for him, and his goal is to pull you off track, just tempting you toward things that are evil. And you might think, well, the hard thing in my generation here in America is sexual temptation, because every TV show we try to watch that's made for young adults, the boy and the girl are going to get together in some scene or another, or the movie, and start ripping their clothes off and doing their thing. Why is this in every single movie and every single TV show aimed at young adults in this country in 2020? You know what, guys? They didn't have TV shows, but it was the same thing back then. Look at the sins it lists that they got tempted by. The God followers in their generation got tempted to commit sexual immorality. Some of them did. And in one day, 23 of them, 1,000 of them, God took them out. He said, you guys are gone. These were God's people, and they got tangled up in sin, and God says, that's it. I'm setting you aside. I'll use somebody else. Those stories were written for us. So if you don't think you need the Old Testament stories, you need them. All right? So, let's keep going on here. It says we shouldn't put God to the test like some of them did. They thought they could just play around with some of this evil, and they still got their church and their Bible and their heritage. They can make it out. They can kind of have one hand in the world and one hand around Jesus. And no, they died. All their corpses, except for 2, all but 2 of God's people, died because they fell into evil. It says we shouldn't put God to the test like some of them did, and they were killed by snakes. We shouldn't whine and complain like some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. God was just taking his people out. That's what he does with his people. He disciplines his own. Okay? And listen to this. These things happened to them as examples. Isn't this crazy? And they were written down as warnings for who? Yeah, for us. For us living where? For us who live in the final age. For all the New Testament Christians who would someday be on earth. Guess what, guys? That's us. Okay? So my question is, we got one more verse. So if you think in 2020, you sitting here, young adults at Crosspoint Church, if you think that you're standing firm, God's word says this, and this is made to help you, made to make you smart and humble. Watch out so that you don't fall. It's good to have that humility that doesn't get too cocky and says, you know what? I could get pulled in just as easy as that other person did. So the question is, which kind of tree will you be when the storm comes? And there is an amazing little letter. It's only 5 pages long. It's not even a book. We call it a book of the Bible. It's 5 pages. When is a book ever 5 pages long? I mean, 5 pages long is kind of like a long letter or maybe an essay. I don't know. But it was a letter. This was a person writing to a group of Christians. There is an ancient letter that can make you strong so that you can stand through any test that comes your way. There's no letter in the New Testament like this little letter, an ancient letter written in fire, waiting in a box, and it's a letter called Hebrews. Every single one of you guys, listen up. Every single one of you guys is going to face temptation in your life. Strong temptation that's going to pull at you and try to get you to let go of this Jesus thing. Just give it up. It's going to come at you. And maybe for some of you, if you're like me, it's going to come at you again and again and again. And I'm a pastor, Okay, so if it comes at me, I know it's going to come at you, right? Now, some of you, maybe you've already started to turn away in your hearts. And in some quiet, secret area of your life, you do have some secret sins you're just kind of playing around with. So you got one hand around Jesus still, but you got some things that's kind of, they're just in the corner. Nobody has to know about those. They don't seem like they're hurting me. They don't seem like they're hurting me. Guess what? They are hurting you because you got one hand off of Jesus. And guess what? You're fine when things are calm. Some of those trees, they're fine when it's just a little light breezy day. But when that storm comes, what's going to happen? Spoiler alert, you can't survive a storm in the Christian life if you don't have two hands wrapped around Jesus. If you got one hanging on to some secret sin, spoiler alert, you're going down. You are not going to survive it spiritually. All right? One hand will not be enough. But there's a little letter, guys, a 5-page letter, that if you walk through it and let it do its thing in you, it can make you strong. It's an ancient letter written in fire, waiting in a box, and the box is shaking and rumbling. It's a letter called Hebrews. This letter, I love this little letter. It's amazing. It's powerful. Pastor Key asked me to preach this letter this year. I don't know why he picked it, but this letter is flame and it's fire, okay? This letter is like the tornado of the New Testament. It's not sweet and fluffy. It hits you and it makes you strong. So I kind of like it. It's not unlike James that way. So let me tell you a little bit about this letter. Today's just the introduction week. We're not actually going to get into it at all, but I'm just setting it up. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but first, a prohibition. For the rest of this year, I forbid any of you in this room to go home and read the letter of Hebrews. You are not allowed to read even one verse on it. Why am I doing that? Because each week when you come, I want to kind of like peel back a little piece of the candy. And we're going to open it together and just walk through it piece by piece. And when we do it together and I unpack it for you, you're going to see it in HD and it's going to explode and come alive. And probably every other time that you read it after that, it will always come alive to you. But we're going to walk through it once together and let it come alive and explode kind of for us together. So you're prohibited from reading the book of Hebrews. Raise your hand if you heard me say that and you understand. You are forbidden from reading the book of Hebrews. You can go home and read other books of the Bible. Don't touch the letter of Hebrews. All right, cool. So let me tell you a little bit about this letter. Two things. First of all, it's a letter of mystery and it's a letter of power. Let's start with the mystery first. This is kind of crazy, guys. There's a lot of letters in the New Testament, right? Right? I got 27 of them right here. Hebrews, this is the blank copy. It's just a display one. That's the real. Hebrews is the only letter in the New Testament we have no idea who wrote. Nobody knows who wrote Hebrews. The entire global church agrees we do not know who wrote the book of Hebrews. I mean, there's theories that are out there. Some people guess maybe Paul. Some people think Luke, Clement of Rome, Barnabas. In recent years, people have guessed maybe Jude, Jesus' little brother. James' little brother. Jesus had several little brothers, right? Jude was one of them. Apollos, Philip, Silvanus. What's clear about the author is we know whoever this guy was, and you're going to tell once we start getting through it. This dude knew the Old Testament because he makes a lot of references to Old Testament events and that kind. He was highly educated. That's going to become clear. And he was probably trained. They had this trade back then called rhetoric, and it was a trade of persuasive speaking. And he probably had some training in rhetoric. Personally, I think Apollos wrote it, but I don't really know. It's not really that important to me. At the end of the day, though, this is the only letter in the New Testament we all agree we don't know who wrote it. It's kind of crazy. You might be thinking like, well, why is it in the canon? Like, we don't know who wrote it. I said it was mystery, right? What else did I say about this letter, though? Power. That's why I made it in the canon. Even though the global church around the whole world is not certain who wrote it, they all agreed this letter is stamped with the breath of the Holy Spirit. It carries power, and it needs to be in the canon. And so the global church recognized this book, this little letter has authority. Does it have power? Yes. Is it inspired by the Holy Spirit? Yes. Should it be in the canon? Yes. Mystery plus power. So what else do we know about this little letter? I'll give you just a couple things here. We know it was written initially to Jewish Christians, like Anthony in our story, all right, because of all the quotations from the Old Testament. We know these guys were Jews. So these were Jewish Christians in the first century who we know that when the gospel came to them, they believed Jesus was the chosen one. So they were Jewish, and they became Christians. which meant the rest of the Jews who weren't Christians hated them. They instantly got kicked out of the synagogue. We know they suffered for their faith. They were shunned by their family. So the second they became Christians, they instantly lost everybody in their life. Because the Greeks and Romans, who were the dominant culture in Roman Empire, it was illegal to be a Christian. So they lost all their Greek and Roman friends instantly. They also instantly lost all their Jewish friends, including anybody in their family. So in one moment, whenever they decided to become Christians, they lost basically everything. They couldn't even go to church on Sundays. They were kicked out of their synagogues. They had nothing. So these guys were outcasts by everybody, basically. They were forced to meet in homes for worship. So they would meet Sunday mornings in their homes, in private, little house churches, it was called. Little groups of house churches throughout the city. We know it was written to a group of Christians around the biggest city of the empire. Who knows what the biggest city of the Roman Empire was? I'll give you a hint. It was the capital of the Roman Empire. I'll give you a hint. Yeah, there you go. I was going to give you another hint. It's in the word Roman. Yeah, Rome, the capital of Italy to this day. The biggest city. That was the New York City of the empire. So they were Christians in the New York City of the Roman Empire, outcasts by everybody, and they're meeting in little house churches. All right? So yeah, I've got all that right there. Most likely a group of house churches, or one house church, in or around the city of Rome around 65 AD. We know that they'd suffered because of their commitment to Jesus, and now Nero was emperor, and if you guys learned about Nero in your history books, he was crazy. So they knew more suffering was coming, and he hated Christians. So because of that, some of them were hanging on to Jesus, right? They were still hanging on, but their hands were starting to shake. And they were starting to waver and wobble and ask themselves, man, is Jesus really worth it? Or should I go back to the other Jews? Maybe I should go back into the old covenant with them. They were tired, they were discouraged, and they were seriously considering abandoning Jesus and the Christian faith and going back to Judaism. So for them, guys, this letter came as a blazing light saying, are you crazy? Don't be crazy. Jesus is so much better than the old covenant. Don't throw your commitment away or you may never get it back. Nope, put your eyes on the Son. No turning back. Instead, it's time for the exact opposite. Let's draw close to God. This book was like light exploding from a fire hydrant for those Christians in the city of Rome. So my question for you is, how about you? How about you? Are you going through any storms right now where if you were honest with the people in this room or with your NF group, if you were honest, you would say, I've been thinking about leaving Jesus. I've been shaking a little bit in my faith because this happened or this happened. You know, maybe right now your Christian faith is causing you pain. That's a little different question, but I'm asking you that. Is anybody in this room, you don't have to answer, you don't have to raise your hand, but if you were honest, is your Christianity causing you some pain at all? Maybe it's at your work. Maybe it's at your school. You know, people throw a lot of labels on Christians. I've heard a lot in my day. I still do, you know. Goody-goody, virgin boy, church girl. I could ask you guys give me some more updated labels labels of shame that they put on Christians, right? It's always, guys, let me tell you, it's always been like that. It was like that for these first Christians in the first century, okay? For you, maybe it's not labels they put on you, but if you haven't gotten any of those labels, spoiler, you probably are, okay? But maybe for you, they just don't treat you quite the same, and you can tell a difference. Like, they don't welcome you into their groups the same way they do the others, you know? So if you were totally honest with yourself, have you ever thought about turning back? Be honest with yourself. Have you ever thought about turning your back on Jesus? Has your mind ever at least wandered and started to think, man, if I didn't have this Jesus thing, you know, I could have so much more friends. I could have all these friends. Oh, I could watch all these TV shows I've been trying to stay away from because I know you got some scenes in there I shouldn't be. I could watch all those shows and those movies. Man, or there's this one sin that, man, I could just jump in and do it. I mean, has your mind started to wander? If it wasn't for my religion or my parents' religion, is it even my religion anyways, or did I just kind of get born into this thing? Have you ever found your commitment starting to shake and wobble? And if the answer is yes, my urging to you would be, don't miss a single week this year as we walk through this letter, because this letter is coming for you right in the nick of time, and it can make you strong. And if your answer is no, actually, I've never thought any of those thoughts, I am standing strong, then my encouragement to you is you actually might be in more serious danger, because all that means is, because you ain't stronger than the others, all that means is you haven't faced your storm yet, okay? But spoiler alert, let me tell you, your storm's coming. It is coming. And so it's best to get ready, guys. The darkness makes its assault on every single Christian. Darkness is coming for you. But there is a letter that can help you be prepared for it. And it's a letter unlike any other letter in the New Testament. It's an ancient letter written in fire, waiting in a box, and the box is shaking and rumbling. And 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to open up that box. So that's all I got. You guys can go to your NF groups. Have a great time in your NF groups.